Goalie in the NHL, and we tell you why he is worth every penny of his contract.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1363 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today we go ahead and we continue our fun-filled offseason series. The everydayers are very familiar with this. We do this every single offseason. And if you're new here, it's a good episode to jump right in, because basically what we do is we spotlight one player on the New York Rangers for this upcoming season, and we basically just take a look at him and, you know, what could go right, what could go wrong, and what's the overall outlook for this player for the upcoming campaign. And of course, that would be the 2025-2026 season, which is now our seventh season of Locked On New York Rangers, if you can possibly even believe that. But today, with no further ado, we are going to point the spotlight firmly at the Rangers franchise goalie, Igor Shesterkin. So as we always do, we'll take a look at the bad stuff first, all the worst case scenarios. Then we'll shift our attention to the good stuff, the best case scenarios. And then, like I said, at the very end of the episode, we'll have, you know, some final thoughts, some predictions and whatnot, and just an overall outlook on Igor Shesterkin's upcoming season. So once again, we begin with the worst case scenarios. I think in a worst case scenario for Igor, and honestly, this is the first one that popped into my head when I started to, you know, think about all the things that go right, all the things that go wrong. In a worst case scenario, he endures one of his mid-season funks. We have seen this from Igor Shesterkin over the years. He has been, ever since he was called up from the AHL, for my money, one of the absolute best goalies in the NHL. I think if you take a look at the last half decade of hockey and you compare all the goalies side by side, there aren't too many that can even hold a candle to Igor Shesterkin. But with all that said, if he has one Achilles heel, it does seem like just about every season, with the one exception being 2021, 2022 when he won the Vezina. But other than that, pretty much every season, we do see him go through a bad stretch of hockey. And that's not anything that's super unique to Igor Shesterkin, because it is such a volatile position. And you guys know, today's elite goalie a few years from now might not be that good of a goalie at all. I mean, there have been a couple of guys that have fallen off in recent years and whatnot. Igor is obviously not one of them. But every goalie in the NHL, and for that matter in the world at any level, is not immune to the occasional slump, the occasional bad stretch of hockey where your mechanics get a little bit out of whack. Maybe the mental side of the game, you're not sharp there either, whatever it might be. But we have seen this from Igor Shesterkin, even during some of these awesome all-star seasons that he's had with the New York Rangers, where he does go through these funks. As far as why it happens, I mean, I kind of just alluded to it, but first and foremost, I think it's just the very simple fact that he's human. Sometimes Igor goes on these heaters and it just seems like nobody can get the puck by him. And you just kind of look at it like that's going to be Igor's default setting. And he's always going to be this nasty, and he's always going to be this elite, and he's always going to come up with these superhuman saves. That's not always going to be the case. So first and foremost, yes, he is human. But I feel like at times with Igor, and maybe I'm answering my question here as far as why this happens, it does begin to get a little bit mental, because when you look at his numbers through every stop of his hockey career before he got to the NHL, it's straight out of a video game. And I've talked about that in the past, whether it's the AHL, the KHL, any kind of HL out there. Igor has always been a dominant goalie for essentially the entirety of his life. And that's not really an exaggeration. Then when you get to the NHL, you're up against the absolute best of the best of the world. And like I said before, no goalie is immune to a slump from time to time. But I feel like with him, it's almost like because he was so dominant at every other level of hockey, at every other stage of his life, when this happens to him, it's not even so much that he handles it poorly. It's just like a phenomenon that he's not used to, because again, he has been such a successful goalie at every other stop in his career. And he's been incredibly successful in the NHL as well. But when he gets lit up, when he doesn't have it for a game or two, I just think it's still, even now, kind of weird to him and kind of odd to him. And he doesn't really know how to respond to it. And I'm no sports psychologist or anything like that. But I think, honestly, at times when Igor does go through a funk, it becomes a little bit more mental than physical. So that's in a worst case scenario. He does endure at least another one of those slumps this upcoming season. I think also in a worst case scenario, Igor is unable to bail the Rangers out of their mistakes the way that he used to bail them out of their mistakes. This past season, by just about any metric, any eye test, any stat you want to go with, this was Igor Shesterkin's worst season of his NHL career. Now, his numbers were not dreadful. And I think when you look at the long list of the New York Rangers problems last season, he's not very high up at the top of it. I mean, certainly he struggled at times and he had a couple of rough games here and there, but I wouldn't put him too high at the top of the list. There were a whole bunch of other things going on that to me were a lot more concerning than anything that Igor Shesterkin did or did not do last season. But it also felt like last season, he wasn't able to take his teammates off the hook after a mistake the way that he had done in the past. There were games last year where, and this happened, somewhat frequently, where Igor Shesterkin would not have his A game, right? And he would go out there and he would give up, say, like 3 or 4 goals in a game, and the Rangers would lose 3-2, 4-3, whatever it might be. And at the end of the game, you kind of look at everything that happened, right? And maybe Igor made some good saves in there too. And you look at the total body of work, his performance on the day, and you would think to yourself, like, he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't coming up with those big time clutch saves that he would previously come up with in the past. How many times in the past would the Rangers make a mistake, or not even necessarily the Rangers making a mistake, but the opposition creates a good scoring chance and he would come up with a big time save? Igor bailed out his teammates a lot. That was a staple of Igor's game from very early in his career, all the way up until this past season. And certainly there were times where he did it this past season, but there were other times where it just wouldn't happen. And again, you'd be at the end of one of those games where Igor gives up 4 goals, and you look at the 4 goals, and none of them are like soft per se. There's none that would like drive you crazy or, oh my God, I can't believe that went in. But you look at the 4 goals, and it's like they were all stoppable. Not easy saves necessarily, but saves that we're used to seeing him make in the past. And I think that's where the frustration comes in from Ranger fans with Igor Shesterkin, whatever frustrations you may have had with Igor this past season, because he just wasn't making those elite saves on as consistent of a basis last season, those teammate saving saves that he had done, earlier in his career. So, you know what? In some ways, I think he's just kind of a victim of his own expectations. You just expect him to stop everything. And every time the Rangers make a mistake, you expect him to be the ultimate safety net and bail them out. And there were times where, this past season, he just wasn't able to do it. And I think in a worst case scenario, you see something similar this upcoming season as well. I think also in a worst case scenario, Igor begins to feel the pressure of living up to his record-setting contract. 8 years, $11.5 million, the full no-trade clause. The Rangers basically just gave him everything he could possibly want in a contract. The highest paid goalie in the history of the NHL, both in terms of average annual value and I believe in total dollars of the contract as well. That second part I would have to double check because there used to be no limit on how many years you could give a goalie. I know Price got a monster contract, so I'd have to double check that. But either way, the guy's got a massive contract. And with that, there come expectations. And this is the first season that Igor is playing on that contract. He signed the extension this past season, right in the middle of the year there. But this is the first year where that new contract kicks in. And all of the Rangers' hopes and dreams live with Igor Shesterkin. And like I said, I mean, hey, it's great to get a contract that Igor Shesterkin got for himself. That's awesome. I'm sure he's happy about it. But there are expectations that come along with it. And if you don't play well and you're making that much money, whether you're Igor Shesterkin or anybody else on any other professional sports team making the big bucks, fans are going to be counting on you. And fans are going to be looking on you to be a difference maker and in a positive way. So I think in a worst case scenario, Igor begins to feel, some pressure from that contract as well. But in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to the good stuff, the best case scenarios, the reasons why, or the potential outcomes here that I foresee for Igor Shesterkin and why I think he's going to really return to form this year, have a big time bounce back season, and be, once again, one of the NHL's elite. And we will do all of that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are also building wealth. We've all been there in the past at one time or another. You look at your bank account and you wonder to yourself, where did all my money go? Because between doing various activities, between all the different bills, between going to a Rangers game, between taking the family on vacation, going out to eat, whatever it might be, those bills can pile up, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for continuing to support this podcast throughout the season, the postseason, the offseason, whatever it might be. Those of you that continue to show up for this daily podcast. And going forward, going to be doing some more best and worst case scenarios for different players on the New York Rangers, just like we're doing right here today. Some other fun offseason things as well. Going to be looking to line up some guests for you guys. Going to reach out to some former players, maybe some of the beat writers as well. And you guys let me know if there's somebody you want me to get as a guest on this show. I'll do my best to bring him or her onto the podcast. But for right now, let's go ahead, keep the attention on Igor Shesterkin and talk about the good stuff, the best case scenarios for Igor Shesterkin with the New York Rangers this upcoming season. In a best case scenario, the Rangers' hopes for this upcoming season do not live and die with Igor Shesterkin. Now, for some of you, the everydayers, that, phrase might sound somewhat familiar because when the Rangers were coming down the home stretch of this miserable 2024-2025 season, there were several occasions where I said that the Rangers' hopes and dreams, they live and die with Igor Shesterkin. And the reason I said that, first of all, the Rangers somehow, it's easy to forget this, but by the time that there were maybe about 20 games or so left, the Rangers actually dragged themselves into a playoff spot. They were, at one time, it didn't last very long, only a couple of days, but at one point there, they actually got themselves back to the second wildcard spot. And that accounts for like games in hand and whatnot. The second wildcard spot, despite everything that happened last season, was the Rangers to lose. And then, of course, they did indeed lose it by playing poorly down the stretch, as they had been basically playing poorly the entire, season. But the reason why I kept saying that last season, when we were getting into the second half and we're getting down to 30 games left, 20 games left, 15 games left, whatever it might have been, the reason I kept saying the Rangers' hopes lived and died with Igor Shesterkin is because they did. The Rangers had so many issues last year, so many underperforming players, so much drama in the locker room, so much drama in the front office, a head coach who seemed to have lost the locker room. And we can assess blame to Laviolette, we could assess blame to the players, whatever percentage you want to put in either direction, that's still something that happened. There were guys on this team that looked like they would rather be anywhere else in the world than playing hockey for the New York Rangers. But the one constant and the one thing that it felt like would be there for the Rangers was Igor Shesterkin. The Rangers had way too many problems to fix last year. The special teams, everything went wrong, and yet there they were clinging to a playoff spot. And that's why I kept saying the Rangers' hopes and dreams of making the playoffs, they live and die with Igor Shesterkin. Well, going into this upcoming season, my hope is that not everything lives and die with Igor Shesterkin. Obviously, tremendously impressive player at a tremendously important position. I think we all know and understand that. And certainly it's okay if there are nights where Igor Shesterkin is the best player on the ice. It's even okay if every now and then Igor Shesterkin carries you to a win, wins you a game that you as a team have no business winning. But that cannot be the norm. That cannot be the default setting. We cannot get into a situation where players on this team are basically just looking for Igor Shesterkin to save their bacon every single night. And the funny thing about this one and putting it onto this, best case scenario list, it honestly has more to do with his teammates than it does with Igor Shesterkin himself, but they got to take it upon themselves. Don't just assume that Igor Shesterkin is going to be the greatest goalie on the planet, which he could be, but even if he is, he needs a little bit of help. You can't put everything on the goalie. It's not a recipe for success. A hot goalie can take you a long way, but it can't all fall on the shoulders of the goalie. And Igor Shesterkin, as great as he is no exception to that rule. Best case scenario number 2, we get playoff Igor. And this one's pretty self-explanatory as well. Now, first of all, talking about the playoffs, the Rangers got to get there first. And that's something they were not able to do this past season, despite having the best record in the NHL the year before, despite being in the conference final, despite being 2 wins away from making it to the Stanley Cup final. The Rangers were not able to make it back to the playoffs. And in fact, they got eliminated with multiple games to go. There were a couple meaningless games at the very end of the season. And obviously, it was a season where essentially nothing went right. But talking about playoff Igor, for my money right now, Igor Shesterkin is the best big game goalie on the planet. He is the best Stanley Cup playoff goalie that you could possibly want that's in the NHL right now. It's a shame we didn't get to see that this past season for obvious reasons. But if there was any doubt as far as which goalie in the NHL would you want between the pipes with everything on the line, all the chips down, you need a big-time clutch performance, you need your goalie to come up big, stand on his head, Igor Shesterkin is that guy. I don't think there could be any doubt. Look at some of his competition as far as other guys that might be in the running for that title. You know, the biggest, whatever you want to call it, the go-to clutch goalie in the NHL, in the playoffs, the best playoff performing goalie in the NHL, the guy that you would want there if your season is on the line. Look at the competition. Connor Hellebuck has not been great in the playoffs for the last several seasons. He really struggled this past year in the postseason. He had some good games in there too, but you know, it seemed like especially on the road is where he really faltered. I mean, he got yanked out of 3 games in the first round, and it didn't go a whole lot better for him in the second round after that. And the Jets were bumped despite, you know, having the best record in the NHL. So it's not Hellebuck. You can't go with Hellebuck over Igor in a big playoff game. I don't think it's Jake Ottinger either. If you look at Jake Ottinger, I looked this up today. He has a save percentage under 900 in his last 22 playoff games combined, his most recent 22 playoff games. Now, he was in the conference final this past year, and so were the Stars, and obviously he had a big role in the Stars even making it that far, and I thought it was complete garbage when Pierre DeBoer pulled him out of Game 5 with their season on the line. Didn't like that at all, but be that as it may, I mean, Ottinger has not been all that great in the playoffs, at least not relative to what he's given you in the regular season. You look at Andrei Vasilevskiy. Now, obviously, a couple of cup wins there for Vasilevskiy, and he's had some big-time clutch playoff performances as well, but he's kind of gone south in recent seasons. The Lightning have gotten bumped out of the first round of the playoffs for 3 consecutive years. And in that time, those 3 seasons, Vasilevskiy has a goals against average of 3.22 or higher in all of Tampa's last 3 playoff appearances, the last 3 seasons. It's 3.22 or higher for all of them. So he has not been great recently. Nobody can take the cups away, and he obviously had a huge role in that, but he has not been good recently. Sergei Bobrovsky. Now, obviously, he's won the last 2 Stanley Cups with the Florida Panthers. You could definitely make a case for Bob. I do think, though, that when you look at the Rangers versus the Panthers, especially this past season, it's pretty obvious that the Panthers have a better team, a better supporting cast, and I think that Bobrovsky has benefited from that. Not taking anything away from Sergei Bobrovsky, you can't win the Stanley Cup with just some random dude playing goalie, and obviously Bobrovsky is a very important member of the team the past couple of years and will be going forward as well, but I wouldn't take Bobrovsky over Igor Shesterkin based on everything that we just said. Who else? What other goalie is even in the conversation as far as the guy that you want with everything on the line in a postseason series? Igor has played 44 playoff games in the NHL. That's more than half a season's worth of games played, you know, half of a regular season. So it's not a small sample size, and he's got a 241 goals against and a 928 save percentage. No shutouts, which is kind of weird, and you would expect to have a couple by now. But in a strange way, I feel like the fact that he doesn't have any shutouts in the playoffs, it almost makes those numbers more impressive, because if he had like 3 or 4 shutouts, you know, that would single-handedly pull down the goals against average and, you know, increase the save percentage. The fact that he has those kinds of numbers without the benefit of a single shutout, in a strange way, it almost makes it a little bit more impressive, because it speaks to his consistency and how well he plays on a game-by-game basis once it gets to the playoffs. Another way of looking at it, again, I would say for Igor Shesterkin, his career in the playoffs, again, 44 games, he's basically played 2 bad games in the playoffs. Games 3 and 4 at Pittsburgh in 2022. And then he got back in there and he led them, or helped lead them, to a 3-1 series comeback. So all this is to say that Igor Shesterkin is the guy. If your life is on the line, you need a win, Igor Shesterkin is the guy that you want between the pipes. And if you say it's anybody else, I feel like you're just kind of lying to yourself. Who else can you even make a case for at this point? One more stat that I'll throw out there as it pertains to Igor Shesterkin in the playoffs, because I just don't think that he gets enough credit for being as lights out, as money in the postseason as he's been. One more stat that I found today that I thought was absolutely insane. In Igor's last 36 postseason games, he has held the opposition to 2 goals or fewer in 23 of them. 23 times in 36 games, Igor Shesterkin has held the opposition to 2 goals or less. That's insane. That's an insane number. So you can't tell me for a second that there's anybody that should be in net in a big-time game other than Igor Shesterkin. People can go on and on about the contract, and I understand why that happens. I understand the big contract does make you a target. But again, when you're talking about somebody who's the best big-game performer in the NHL as far as the goalie position is concerned, then I think it only makes sense that he also has the biggest contract. That's just me. You guys can weigh in on that matter. I know some people just don't like the concept of paying the goalie in general, but I think when you've got somebody like Igor Shesterkin, you owe it to yourself to hang on to him. And, did they pay a little more than I would like? Sure. But it was the going rate for Igor Shesterkin. I really do believe that. I think also in a best case scenario, Igor Shesterkin gets off to a hot start this season. The Rangers this year start the season home against the Penguins, at the Sabres, and then a back-to-back of at Penguins and home Capitals. And maybe Quick gets one of those 2 games in the back-to-back there. But the Rangers have to hit the ground running this upcoming season. They have to change the energy in that room. They have to change the vibes in that room. They have to forget about what happened this past season. You always want to get off to a good start in any season, in any sport, at any level, for obvious reasons. But I think when you're coming off of a miserable campaign like the Rangers are, it just makes it that much more important to just switch things up a little bit and put your best foot forward early in the season. And I realized they actually got off to a good start this past year, and it obviously didn't help them very much. But be that as it may, you still have to change the vibes. And I think Igor Shesterkin getting off to a fast start, he'll set the tone for the rest of the game, the rest of the team, and hopefully they win some games, early in the season. And that's going to be big. Igor has to get off to a good start this upcoming season, and he will in a best case scenario. One more best case scenario, kind of a unique one I want to throw out here, and it's one of those things that I don't think anybody's really talked about this, but how about Igor Shesterkin emerging as one of the team leaders this upcoming season? Now, this team had a giant leadership void this past year. I think that much was obvious to anybody that watched this team. There were just too many games where there wasn't any kind of fight, any kind of energy. It just was bad. I mean, that's the easiest way that I can put it. And I will also say that I don't think it should ever be a mandate for a starting goalie to step up in a leadership role, because those guys have enough on their plate. There's enough going on. They have enough to worry about. And it's obviously a high stress, very physically and mentally demanding position. But it would be a bonus if Igor was able to step up in some ways as a leader. You think back to Henrik Lundqvist, and a lot of players that were teammates of Henrik, they've talked about how they just never wanted to let him down. There was a certain standard of excellence there. And Henrik Lundqvist, it didn't have to be in the raw form. It was just the way he went about his business, the way he prepared for games, the way that he competed. You didn't want to let that guy down. And there was a certain standard of play that Henrik Lundqvist expected from all of his teammates when he was the franchise goalie of the New York Rangers. Can Igor Shesterkin get to that same level? Lundqvist just kind of had that aura about him, and Lundqvist played with an intensity that was like a 10 out of 10. And Lundqvist has talked about this himself, where you have to find what intensity level works best for you as a goalie. And he talked about how he had to be really intense out there and really fired up and ready to go, whereas other goalies, staying calm seems to work a little bit better. And I think Igor is a little bit more on the calm side than Henrik was. Now, we have seen Igor over the past couple of seasons. He does mix it up. He got into it with Brady Tkachuk this past season. He will jump into the middle of a scrum if something does happen. But Igor, I don't think the intensity level is right at the same level as it was for Henrik Lundqvist, and I think that's okay. It's whatever works best, for any goalie. But Igor, again, I just want to see, it would be a bonus if it happened, him just kind of carry himself the same way that Henrik Lundqvist did, where it's like, man, even if it's unspoken, we have to play hockey at a certain level. I want to just kind of see that from Igor Shesterkin this upcoming season and beyond. And one other thing here, excuse me, as far as Igor Shesterkin stepping up in a leadership role, is, if you can believe this, possibly Igor Shesterkin has become one of the longest tenured players on the New York Rangers. There are not many guys that have been here longer than Igor. Somebody like Artemi Panarin, it feels like he's been here forever, and he has. Do you realize that Artemi Panarin and Igor Shesterkin both debuted for the Rangers in the same season, 2019-2020. Now, obviously, Panarin had been in the league longer than Igor, and Panarin was there at the start of the season for the Rangers, whereas Igor was called up in the middle of the season. But still, that was the first season for both of them playing for the New York Rangers. That'll give you an idea of just how long the Igor's been here. So, he's pushing the big 3-0. I mean, he's becoming a veteran in every sense of the word. And for him to step up in a leadership role, I think that would be big for the New York Rangers. It would be an added bonus if he was able to do that. So in just a second, we'll keep everything rolling. Some final thoughts on Igor Shesterkin, just kind of an overall outlook, a verdict, some predictions for Igor Shesterkin this upcoming season. And we will do all of that good stuff in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and close out today's episode with some final thoughts on Igor Shesterkin. I got to say right off the top here, for the Rangers to have any chance to get back to where they were 2 years ago, one of the best teams in the NHL, one of the best records in the NHL, one of the final 4 teams standing in the NHL, a team that actually makes you think that they have a shot at winning the entire thing. If we're going to get anywhere in that same zip code again, Igor is going to have to be, I would say, the best player on the New York Rangers. And in some ways, it's always apples and oranges when you're comparing goalies to skaters, right? They're just vastly different positions and different dynamics and whatnot. But Igor Shesterkin, again, and you can throw in the contract here. I'm going to try not to do that too much this season, but for what he's getting paid, he has to be one of the guys driving the bus. I do think the Rangers are a playoff team this upcoming season, but very clearly, this is not a roster, an organization that is without some flaws. Can the star players bounce back this upcoming season? That's a big question that needs to be answered. Will there be a little bit more fight, a little bit more energy, a little bit more jump from this team on a game in and game out basis? Because if that's not going to be the case, then you could pretty much forget about it right now. If the Rangers come out with the same effort this upcoming season that they had this past season, and that's pretty much how they operate throughout the entire 2025-2026 campaign, then forget about it. They're not going anywhere. I mean, maybe you could eke your way into the playoffs, but that's not a championship, caliber team, not by a long shot. Do they have enough physicality? Do they have enough speed? Do they have enough depth? Are they going to get more out of their young players? Can the big 3 forwards that we've been talking about, Pro, Berard, and Othman, can those guys step up? Where are they with their development? What are the right line combinations? What are the right defense pairings? How is this team going to respond to Mike Sullivan this upcoming season? That's a lot of questions and a lot of things that could go a bunch of different ways. But with all that said, the backbone of this team, the one constant of this team, the guy that you should be able to depend on night in and night out, that's Igor Shesterkin. I mean, there's some other players that fit that description too, but nobody affects the game more so than the goalie. And I think that will always be the case. He needs to be the constant of Ranger hockey. Now, that's not to say that he'll never have a bad game, that he's not allowed to ever have a bad game, that he'll never, in 82 games, plus however many playoff games, that he'll never allow a single soft goal. Those things will happen from time to time. But when those things do happen, they should be a surprise. And I think this upcoming season, Igor Shesterkin is going to raise his play back to the level that we saw for the rest of his entire career before this past season. He's going to be one of the best players on the New York Rangers. And whenever you do see Igor have a bad night, or wherever you do see him allow a goal that you think he should have stopped, it's going to be very, very surprising. Whereas this past season, it got to a point, and again, Igor wasn't too high on my list of things wrong with the Rangers this past season, but it got to a point where if Igor let in one that he should have stopped, it was kind of like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it's been going this season. Or if he had a bad game, kind of the same thing there. I think we're going to get back to Igor Shesterkin. Igor Shesterkin is a very proud, very competitive player. He knows that this past season was not his best. And I think, we talked about the mental side of the game and how at times maybe it's affected him. I do think he's gotten better in that regard as the seasons have gone on here. Memory of a goldfish. If you have a bad game, you got to forget it, move on to the next one. Hopefully Jonathan Quick has and will continue to help him in that aspect of his game. But, the bottom line, Igor has to be one of the guys for this New York Ranger team if they're going to go anywhere this upcoming season. I'm also expecting, and you probably figured it out by now, for Igor Shesterkin to have a Vezina-worthy season. Not saying he has to win it, not saying that Igor's season is a complete failure if he does not win it, but he should be one of the guys in the mix. We talked about his performances in big games. He's got to perform that way throughout the entire season. He should be one of the upper echelon elite goalies in the NHL, and I do think that he will ultimately be exactly that for the New York Rangers. Something else as far as Igor and his outlook for this upcoming season, I'm going to do my best, even though I talked about it once or twice already in today's episode, to not always mention Igor Shesterkin's contract. I'm going to do my best to do that with all the players in the New York Rangers. In some ways, it's unavoidable because the NHL does have a salary cap. And due to that salary cap, despite the fact that it is rising, there are typically a lot of difficult decisions that need to be made. And we do collectively as fans, you've probably done it, I've certainly done it, we kind of pigeonhole these guys to what their salary is. Once the puck drops, it doesn't really matter how much money you're making. I mean, it's about going out there and playing hockey. And there are expectations that come with big contracts, but I'm going to do my best not to always, every time he lets in, I go, $11.5 million for that. That's just not, I think, a healthy way to go about this upcoming season as it pertains to the expectations for Igor Shesterkin. Look, again, I've talked about the contract. I would have liked it to be a little bit lower, but for my money, the best goalie in the NHL, when you look at the last half decade, the collective body of work, the best goalie in the NHL, and almost undeniably the best big game goalie in the NHL, for him to be paid as such, for him to get the biggest contract of any player at the position, it's warranted. And I do think as time goes on, you won't feel the impact of that contract nearly as much as far as how much of the salary cap is taking up, because the salary cap's been jumping. It had a big jump this past year. It's projected to have a big jump next year as well. And as the years go on here, Igor's, his number's not going to go up with the salary cap. It's going to stay at $11.5 million per season. And that being the case, that also means that the percentage that Igor is eating of the salary cap will go down and down and down as the salary cap continues to rise and rise and rise. And for anybody that still might not be sold on paying Igor the big bucks and re-signing him, here's my question. Who is the Rangers goalie right now? Now, you could argue that the Rangers should be rebuilding, and in so doing, you could have potentially traded Igor Shesterkin for a king's ransom. I would not do that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying the Rangers couldn't have possibly gone down that road, but the bottom line, that's not what they're doing. They are looking to retool. They are looking to compete for this upcoming season. And with that being the case, if Igor Shesterkin is not the goalie of the New York Rangers, then who is? Not Jonathan Quick. I mean, Quick's awesome, man. He's been a great addition to this team. I think he's a great locker room guy, and he's played some good hockey for the Rangers when he's been between the pipes. But he's also going to be 40 this upcoming season. Dylan Garand, I mean, I like Garand too. He just had a great season with the Wolfpack, but he's never played in an NHL game. And if you look at free agency this past year, none of the good goalies made it to free agency. Thatcher Demko almost did, but he was re-signed by Vancouver at the 0 hour. I forget the exact terms of the contract, but it was a pretty good amount. You look at other guys that actually made it to free agency as far as goalies are concerned. I mean, you're talking about like Cal Peterson, Vitek Vanacek, David Riddick. You want one of those guys as the starting goalie for the Rangers this upcoming season? Not me. I'm going to stick with Igor Shesterkin, the best big game goalie in the NHL. But we'll call it there. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. If you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @JChick17, and definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.